Next, from Chicago, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart, a former prosecutor and state legislator, gives an address on the state's agenda for criminal justice reform. This runs about 40 minutes.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the introduction. It is amazing, though, when you think about it. When we were in Springfield, did you ever think it could get worse than we were down there? And those are apparently now the glory years. Yes, exactly. We did budgets and everything back then. It was wild. Thank you so much for inviting me here today on this topic. And as I was sitting there listening to Paula and Tony, it was amazing to me on multiple fronts. One was they were hitting so many points that I would hit, so now I have less to talk about, which is, no, thank you, it's a benefit to everyone out here. The other part, too, though, is just how right they are on all the different points. And with that, though, I find myself thinking that, there are very thoughtful people who are thinking about these issues, talking about these issues, which is fantastic because this was not always the norm. But the one thing that I always try to make sure that I communicate to people, from like the government standpoint, we are not doing anything near enough at all, and there's absolutely no sense of urgency. There isn't. There isn't. For some people, would they say, oh, we're moving rapidly? They could, but I would suggest to you, if you had a loved one locked up at Cook County Jail or in the Illinois Department of Corrections, and that is not the appropriate place for them, I don't think you would take it to be a proper response to say, we're getting around to it, we're working on it, we have some committees talking about it. You would say, this is outrageous, this is my loved one, this is a good person, why are they caught up in this system? And it sort of ties into what Paula was talking about at the outset, which is, how did we get here? How did we get here? So I just wanted to read you really just two, but unfortunately for you, I could read you dozens, if not hundreds, of these type of scenarios. So let me just walk through this one here. Michael Daniels has been in my custody for over 100 days now. The reason he's in my custody is because he refused to leave a gas station. After he was arrested, he was given an I bond, meaning he didn't have to put any money up. He then did not show up for his next court date, and a warrant was put out for his arrest. He's severely mentally ill and homeless, okay? So he didn't show up for his court date. I would suggest to you that if you have those issues, making your next court date probably really not high on your list of things to do. You're trying to find a place to live and a way to eat. So the notion that someone missed a court date, not really hard to understand. Mind you, Michael has only had 3 arrests in his entire life, and the last one was in 1999 for a minor case where it was thrown out. So he has sat in my place now for 100 days. He's acutely mentally ill. He's had a BCX order, which means the court has said we have to determine whether or not you're fit to stand trial here. And those things, mind you, on average, on a good day, take 70 days, 70, from the time it's ordered till it's actually done. So for Michael not leaving the gas station, he's with me 100 days, and he's going to be with me some more. He needs $100 to get out of the jail, okay? So he's been sitting there. Latasha Eatman, okay, on October 13th of last year, Latasha was working at a store in her community that she's been working at for 15 years now. 15 years she's been working there. Latasha has a 5-year-old son. She's working in the store. The police did an operation, which is not uncommon these days, where they're trying to find non-stabbed cigarettes and people who are selling them one at a time and things like that. So the police go in, they go to examine that. While they're in there, and something that's not untoward or wrong, they ask for IDs from all the different people who are in the facility and in the building. And she's working there, has for 15 years. They run her, and lo and behold, comes back with a warrant for arrest. She's taken into custody. Okay. She is taken into custody on a 23-year-old warrant for violation of probation. Okay. She had only been arrested twice in her life, both for minor possession cases. The one that the warrant was based on was the second arrest she had ever had, and that was for possession of cannabis. She had received some type of probation, and she didn't comply with one of the terms, doing one element of community service. So a no bond warrant was put out for her, which is the tradition, mind you. The tradition when you violate your terms of probation is you have a no bond warrant put for you, meaning that when you're arrested, there's no amount of money you can come up with. So she has a no bond warrant put on her. She sits in my custody for 49 days. Misses Thanksgiving, misses her son's birthday. She's sitting there. She got in front of a judge at one point, but was unable to convince the judge that a bond should be set. And so we found her, we brought her to the attention of the state's attorney's office, and they agreed to drop the case. Now, mind you, there was no one on the planet that could find her probation file in the first place. So the ability to actually prove it up, impossible. But now that woman sat in our custody for all those days. Now, I mention those to put out to you, is that our country? Is that our country, the country we live in? Is that the country where we do things like this? Cavalierly, without very much thought at all, lock people up, incarcerate them for extended periods of time, and then at the end of it, really with a great deal of indifference, just let them go. And say, hey, move on your way, we're off to our next thing. Is that us? And I would suggest to you that's not us. It's absolutely not us. But well, then how is this going on like this? How is it this is allowed to continue like this? And as I tell you, I see this all the time, all the time. I would suggest to you some of the very strengths of our country are one of the reasons why this occurs. What do I mean by that? We live in the greatest country in the world. We absolutely do. We have all of these rights. We have rights that are embedded in the Constitution. And so as a result of that, what I have seen is that for people who are not engaged in the criminal justice system, it gives them this false sense of security, that everything is working out just perfectly. Everything's fine. We have all those rights. Anybody who's in jail or prison, they're bad. They're bad and they deserve it. And then we all go about our business. And I'm not suggesting that the world needs to become criminal justice experts, needs to find out what I'm doing each and every day. But I would suggest to you, if you think about it, any society, take your pick, any society, any government, if you look at what are the most impactful things that that society can do to its members, I would think we'd all agree, well, number one would be if that society collectively decided we want to execute somebody for some act. Okay, so that would be the most impactful. I would suggest right underneath that is incarcerating them. So incarcerating them, you would imagine, is something held to the highest degree of scrutiny, that we only do it in the rarest of cases when someone is really, really bad. And that's not what's happening. It is absolutely not happening. And yet, that's our country. And how is this allowed to go on like this? I would suggest to you, as Paula was laying out all these different factors that had come into play here, it's truly some well-meaning, efforts, some purely politicized efforts, absolutely. But at the end of the day, this is allowed to continue to go on because of indifference, absolute indifference, because it really doesn't impact us. But for the people that I see virtually every day, this is the worst conceivable thing that you can imagine, absolutely worst. And yet it is, in fact, going on. It's been going on forever, absolutely forever. And you sit there and say, okay, well, in that kind of, they have rights, okay. They have, right to a lawyer. Yes, they do have a right to a lawyer. And the public defender's office is fantastic. Amy's doing a great job, amazing. And they're trying. Their caseloads are incredible. Is that because they decided, this is the caseload? No, that's because of their budgets. Well, they have a right to a jury. Well, people don't take advantage of that very often. They have the right to file motions. No, it doesn't happen too often either. Well, they have that right. They have that right for that speedy trial. That's it. That's what we got. That's never done. Never done. It's never done. Absolutely never done. And you look at who I have in my custody, once again, jails are supposed to be holding people waiting on a trial. There's a tiny little group of people that are there serving a minor sentence of some nature, but the vast majority of my population is always 95% people waiting on their trial. I have 2 people in my custody right now who have been waiting 10 years for their trial. I have 2 waiting 9 years, 4 waiting, and I'll hear from people when I'll bring that up, and it's like, well, Tom, you have to look at the individual case. I said, well, hey, news flash for you. I used to be in the courtroom. I was a prosecutor. So unfortunately for you, I actually get it. So you can't do this normal lie and types of thing, make everything sound so complicated that the average person then walks away saying, oh, that makes sense. None of this makes sense. None of it makes sense. Absolutely none of it. And I'd suggest to you, too, think about that evil, vile person, Dylan Roof, went into the church, massacred those beautiful people. From the time of him murdering all these people to the time of his conviction was 18 months. There was mental health issues. It was a death penalty case. He moved through numerous lawyers, including himself. 18 months. And we can't figure out how to move these things along. And how is that justice? It's not justice. Absolutely it's not justice. And we see it each and every day. But the problem is most of the focus is normally on those really outliers, you know, the 10 years, 9 years, 8 years in custody. But for the individuals who are in there, who shouldn't be in their first place, 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, that's too much. That's too much. And so you sit there and say to yourself, well, once again, how do we get here? How do we get here? And I suggest to you both because of, as I say, this lulling into the sense that everything's okay, but then add to it, once again, in interaction with the government that should be the most scrutinized thing in the world and analyzed. Who at the end of the day are the only people that really analyze the data? The advocates, the individuals involved with universities. They do that. Are people in government doing this? Are they poring over this data? Oh, God, no. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. When I became sheriff, the entire jail management system, so the instrument that would tell me who's in the jail, how long they're in the jail, all the rest of the stuff, DOS-based computer system. When we finally got rid of it, I guarantee you that company that made that green paper that folded over each other, we put them out of business when we moved, okay? So we were operating a DOS-based computer system. We move like 1,000 people a day at the jail, you know, back and forth to court and everywhere else. The way we knew whether to move somebody based on like a court order up until a year ago, was triplicate paper. Triplicate. And mind you, this was all handwritten by a clerk. So whether or not someone was actually, we were being ordered to release somebody or hold them, really it was open to a lot of interpretations. Really didn't know. Because that's what we had. That's the type of system that we had at the time. And then you look at something now that's been much more present in the news for a lot of really good reasons. Police shootings. But I would suggest you add to it law enforcement interactions where there's criminal allegations of sexual assault by law enforcement. Those different times that those have occurred when the FBI, I have great relationship with the FBI, everything's fine, but they're seen as a repository of a lot of the data and the information. When people ask them to get the data on shootings, sexual assaults, things like that, they don't have it. They don't have it. Because that's something they never accumulated. And much of the data that a lot of these different sources have is questionable data. Why? It's just whatever people sent them in whatever format. So it's very incomplete. And why do I mention this? It circles back to what I told you before. Now, is this a society that is very serious about how they're going to use this incredible power of incarcerating their own people? No, it's not. It's indicative of people who are indifferent, who are absolutely indifferent. Because it's not me. It's not me. And this is not this country. I know it's not. And so that's why when we were talking, and Paul, you mentioned it, Tony, you mentioned it, there is a high educational curve we have to have here, where we have to get average people to understand what is really going on here. Because this is fixable. It's fixable, but there has to be this will to fix it. And there has to be a sense of urgency, that we're not just going to push this thing off, we're going to just put up set another committee, another task force. No. We need to start moving on these things yesterday. And they're there. They're there. We don't need all the great minds to come up with the newest iteration of something. They're out there. There's things that we can do. There's things that we can be doing right now to move this along. We have been attempting to do that on many, many levels, but one of the things I have always found to be so fascinating is whenever I'm talking about, you know, the need to really focus on this and the need to make sure we're focused in the right area, how many people actually who are involved with the criminal justice system, either involved with it or studying it, how much they miss it, how much and how often they miss it. I got invited to the Brookings Institution last year to speak to them about reentry and some other programs. When I first was asked to do it, it was more to talk about how we were interacting with the prison system. And I said, time out. Do you guys not understand that it is great, fantastic to work on reentry from the prison system, but by doing that, you're missing the #1 funnel into the community. It's us. And they was like, really? I said, yeah. Last year, Illinois Department of Corrections sent back into the community about 30,000 people. I alone, one sheriff, I sent over 33,000 people back to the community. But yet when you hear people talk about reentry programs and things like that, they're 9 times out of 10 talking about prison. And you're missing the largest group. The largest group of people who, mind you, are all going back to the communities they came from, and based on the data that we have put together, these are some of the most difficult communities with challenges you can't imagine, many of them the most violent communities. And yet the tradition is, well, you know, that's not your job. It's not your job. And once again, is this because there's all of these indifferent, you know, evil sheriffs out there that don't want to do it? No, no. What it is this, and think about this for a second. Theoretically, and mind you, this is the case in Cook County. Theoretically, people in a jail are only supposed to be there a very short period of time, waiting for their trial. So the notion that you'd have to really get engaged with a lot of work while they're there should be somewhat foreign, but it's not, as I mentioned before. The other part of it, you know, and Tony referenced that, programs that are affected have times attached to them, you know? It's not like you're sort of winging it, that it's like, okay, this drug program, let's make it a 10-day program. And this guy, well, you know, no, there's defined periods of time. So sheriffs inherently have run away from the programming component because why? People in your custody are not supposed to be there for long, and it's a transient population. You never know when it is that they're going to get released. And on an average year, the numbers of people that we have released just because their cases are dropped are staggering. It's one of those things where it's hard, once again, to get your arms around this, but in a given year, over 7,000 people have their cases dropped that are in my custody. So when you're looking to try to program from them, it makes it difficult. But it's that very thing that has steered people away from doing the programming in jails. But here we are, 33,000 people a year. I'm funneling back to communities, very troubled communities, and yet the notion is, you know, that's not our job to do things. So we decided not to be like that. And we decided years ago to be like that. We decided that this is what we have going on, this is what we've had handed to us, and we're going to be different. We are going to act like what we have become, which is the hub of a lot of the crises that we have in our community, a lot of the people who are in crisis. So in doing that, it sort of required us to sort of reinvent quite a few things, because once again, the tradition is the sheriff, you get somebody, your job is really straightforward. You get them back and forth to court, you feed them, make sure they don't hurt themselves, hurt somebody else, get hurt. That's really the end of it. I was of the impression we needed to do much more, and we needed to immediately. What really pushed the accelerator down was when I first became sheriff, and it became abundantly clear on day one that I really wasn't sheriff as such. Because in spite of my history degree, mind you, I was now the head of the largest mental institution in the state of Illinois. And I was like, wow, fascinating. I didn't realize all these great minds in the state had come together and said, we got to find a history major to run this mental institution. And I was like, wow, outstanding, guys, great idea. But it's truly, probably as much thought that was even put into this. You know, Paula referenced it earlier. What we have done to the mentally ill is abysmal. It's a national embarrassment. I guarantee you decades, if not a century from now, we will be a generation that will be looked upon by people in the worst of terms. We'll be the ones that look back on and they'll say, listen, oh my God, that was that horrible generation where they locked up people who were mentally ill. What rotten people they had to be. And we'll have a hard time running from that one, folks, because that's absolutely what we're doing. Absolutely, without hesitation, is what we're doing. 46 of the 50 states, the largest mental health facility in the state is a jail or a prison. And the largest one in the country is me. And so, once again, because of a thoughtful process, oh God, no. Can you think of any psychologists, you know, psychiatrists who would sit there and say, you know, because of this individual's bipolar disorder, let's see, course of treatment, I know what we're going to do. We're going to put him in a 4x8 cell with a complete stranger and leave him in there for an indeterminate period of time. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Nobody would say that. Absolutely nobody would say that. But yet that's what we do. That's what we do. And we can try to run away and hide from it, you know, and I've had some complete nitwits come to me and say, well, Tom, it wasn't like they were randomly picked up. They were picked up because they committed a criminal offense. And I was like, no. The event that brought them into our custody was something that we clearly could and should expect would occur with someone who has serious mental illness, may have been non-diagnosed, but certainly is not being treated. What in God's name do you expect is going to happen? And when you look at the people that we have in our custody who are mentally ill, the events that bring them into our custody are just that: criminal trespass to property. They're trying to find a place to sleep. Drug possession, self-medicating, retail theft, trying to find something to eat. Wow. And once again, we've decided to hide behind that as our way to say it's really okay to throw them all in jail. And that's what we do. My population today, over 30% of them are severely mentally ill. Severely mentally ill. Getting medication, so all sorts of treatment as well. So this is something that is very real, that became very obvious to me that we had to be different. And so what I did was, initially I attempted to divert them by putting together a lot of people, professionals, mental health specialists that I hired, that I put at the front door of the place. So that when people are being dropped off, we divert them into a different type of setting. Met with people who operate facilities, nursing homes, things like that, who agreed to house them, but I couldn't get the judiciary to buy into it. And to show you how bad it is, so I have my professionals doing all this download. And mind you, we only have like 2 hours about that because they get dropped off for a bond hearing, and apparently we're renting the bond room because we got to be out of there by 2, I guess, or something. I don't know. But so we had to move this thing along real quick. And so I have like this 2-hour window to try to download this stuff. So I'll take previous records from individuals who've been there, their information that they give us ourselves. We put it together in a file that the goal was to take it upstairs to the bond court judges to plead for this diversion. Well, after doing this for about 9 months or so, the public defenders, I came to find out, were not giving the information to the judges. Initially, I was very upset because I'd worked with the public defender's office on this. Once I sat down and talked to them, though, I completely understood what they were doing. They had found that when they were giving the information out, that they found that many judges, not all of them, many judges were actually holding it against their clients because they were thinking like, wow, this person's crazy. If I let them out, then this person does something wrong. I'm going to get a lot of heat. And so all this information was just being sat on. So when that experiment failed miserably, I went on to plan B, which was if people want to make me the largest mental health provider, I'm going to be a really good one. And so I brought in doctors, I brought people that traditionally the sheriff's office doesn't hire to put together programming for the individuals with us. Cermak Hospital does it. They have some very passionate people that do some great things as well. Supplemented some of the stuff they're doing, put together, and we have this really vibrant program there. I took a boot camp program that really wasn't working for what you're paying for, and most of them I've seen didn't. Turned that into this really talked about around the country, mental health treatment center, where we have a separate compound away from the jail where we hold a lot of the mentally ill in this somewhat bucolic setting of Quonset huts and gardens and things like that. And we worked with them on all sorts of skills and you name it. It's absolutely fantastic. I have reopened one of the city clinics that they shut down, and I'm operating that one now in Westtown. We put together this plan where we work with the people once we release them. So even after they're no longer in my custody, we stay connected to them. I've had people donate vans to me that we utilize to drive people back and forth to their doctor's appointments. When people are getting ready to be released, we set up ways to reach out to their family, to get pickups at the jail, or we'll drive them out there if we can, which is a very important thing, because most of the people that were leaving me traditionally were homeless, and they had a trajectory that was so understandable. It really was when you think about it. So this family struggled with this individual's mental illness. They loved them intensely. The person would go off their meds every once in a while. You would see there would be a history of some domestic violence in the house. It was more often when someone was off their meds, you would have that type of interaction. And eventually the family couldn't handle it anymore. And so then the person became homeless. They long ago lost their job. They were on the street, and then they would come in contact with us. And so we have a family support group now that we work with the families to reunite them with their loved ones and try to get them to understand that not just what's going on, many of them do, but understand that we'll be a resource for them. We'll keep working with them. And so we put that together in a way that is a really nice continuum. It's been fantastic. I talked to a lot of the detainees, and it is beyond heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. Because I'm sitting there, frankly, from the beginning saying, I'm looking at someone who shouldn't be here, absolutely shouldn't be here. So this is wrong. This is wrong. Sorry with that. But then when people, which I've had on 2 different occasions now, which, mind you, really confuses my staff, and mind you, I do that to my own all the time, but I've had gentlemen that have want to come talk to me, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, and we'll be in a living unit, and they'll come running up to me, and they hug me. And my staff immediately thinks, the worst, and I was like, no, I'm not afraid of these guys here. They like me, unlike most of the people. But they hug you, and tears come out of their eyes, saying, listen, Sheriff, I cannot thank you enough for what you guys are doing for us here. And I was like, no problem. This is the least of what we should be doing for you. And I said, no, you don't understand. This is the first time anybody ever cared. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking to hear that from a grown man in this type of setting who you realize shouldn't even be there. And so in the area of the mental health, we've become really the model of the country, and with it was really just this notion of being thoughtful, just being thoughtful and treating people like you would want to be treated yourself or a loved one. And in doing that, we've had a great deal of success, ridiculous success at the outset. It's amazing. We've had some great partners. Thresholds has been phenomenal, Task, phenomenal. We've had great partners. The only caveat I'd say with them is, meanwhile, they're getting all their funding, eviscerated. So how they keep things rolling, I'll never understand. Great partnerships with different people to help and work with us on this, but it's still one of those things where you're left with this notion they shouldn't even be here. And so that population we feel really good about, but so much of the rest that we see going around is really, once again, not what I believe we stand for. And so we've gone about trying to address issues like the issue of bail reform. And the bail reform one, and I know I talk way too much. And my kids would definitely tell you I talk way too much. But on the bail reform thing, I just wanted to read you like 3 different cases real quick. And they're ones that I think better explain what it is that we're up to there than if I were just to babble on. So here are like 3 cases I'm going to read you is to really underline it. Because the bail reform we've been talking about is to go away from a cash system and have it so that, relatively speaking, you're either so violent you need to be in custody, or you're clearly not that violent, so you don't need any money, you just go home. Washington, D.C. has done it. They have a lot of money they've put into like the pretrial service part, which a lot of people say is a hurdle for us doing it, which really, if you look at it, is really not. Not just because it's like, oh, money's falling out of the sky, Tom. No, we have a lot of those components already in place, so we don't need the whole package. We have parts of it already in place. But here, these are all just recent cases, okay? Kevin Lenar, a 23-year-old, he was arrested in March of 2016, charged with UUW, arrest, he violates probation. And mind you, in these cases, the judge set substantial bonds. So this wasn't a judge saying, oh, go home. No, it set substantial bonds. But it set a $105,000 D bond, meaning they need to come up with $10,500. He absolutely did that in less than a month. And then 2 months later, he was charged with shooting 3 people and killing a 32-year-old man. Kevin Martinez, 21 years old, arrested January of 2015, charged with aggravated UUW, $100,000 bond set. Sure enough, he shortly thereafter, within 2 days, puts up $10,000. Then shortly after that, 2 months later, Chicago police say he was a passenger car that chased an off-duty officer, fired 2 shots at the officer, and he's now in jail on attempt murder charges. Pierre Stokes, 26 years old, charged in June of 2014 with aggravated assault and UUW by felon while on parole. $90,000 bond. He comes up with the $9,000 within days. Then on March 8th, 2016, it's alleged that he shot 3 people at 79th and Ashland, which he's facing attempt murder charges on, but he's also the father of 9-year-old, was the father of 9-year-old Tyshawn Lee, who was shot in 2015. The understanding out there was as Tyshawn was killed, I'm sure you all remember, he was the little angel that was convinced to go to the yard, the playground, behind it by someone saying he wanted to play basketball, and he was executed. They believe it was payback. So there's 3. I got a bunch more here. There's just 3 cases where we'd all sit there and say, what's going on here? I mean, there was a bond set, it was substantial, but they made it. Here's what's going on, is that if you're a member of a gang The most valuable person in that gang is the shooter, the person that will enforce, mind you. So when they get arrested, we got to get them out. So the gangs, without a lot of heavy lifting, have drug money and the rest to get these guys out. And so they're their number one priority, get them out. So they get them out. So those guys get out, but during like a 30-day period, we studied on who's getting out, who's not getting out. And mind you, not to keep patting ourselves on the back in our office, but this is not supposed to be my job, okay? I'm just supposed to feed people and get them back and forth to court. So we studied over a 30-day window who was getting out, who wasn't getting out. And so we found that 25% of the people accused of gun offenses were able to pay their bail. That same 30-day window, just 4% of the people charged with retail theft made their bonds. And so they're sitting there not needing $100, $200, but they'll keep sitting there while the gun offenders are getting out. So the system is clearly broken. I mean, it's abundantly clear it's broken, and we need to have a more thoughtful system. As I mentioned, the Washington system is very thoughtful. It can be implemented in some variation here, but we need to accelerate that. We need to move that ahead so that we don't have people languishing in jails with no point. Because think about that. Really underlying that, if we're going to put somebody in jail, take away their freedom, it's because a very thoughtful decision was made that we absolutely have to have this person away from society. We can't just have it be this thing where by benign neglect, they just sort of languish in there and then eventually they wander away and then we'll just see what happens. We got to start thinking of these folks as the humans that we all are. They're no different than us, and they deserve that. They deserve that type of humanity. So we've been working on the bond reform. We've got some other interesting things that I'm working on now that I didn't keep track of time, but I have a feeling I'm probably either past it or getting right up. Yep, I knew it. But just real quickly, and I'll pull a Paul on you. I'm not taking a breath on this one here. We have worked on, and I believe we've accomplished, ended any form of solitary confinement. And when I say any form, is that if you were to ask most people in the correctional world, do you have solitary confinement, they'd say, no, we don't. No, we don't. If you were to just sort of pull the curtain back just a little bit, you'd find, well, actually you do, but you call it something else. And I was like, oh, well, but it's not solitary. And I was like, oh, my God, I have more intelligent conversations with my 7-year-old. Solitary in my mind is when you keep someone in a cell for 23 hours a day and you don't let them out. And, you can then start getting into the nuances. And you look at some states, I mean, it's just ungodly what they do to some of these people. They'll keep them in solitary or 23-1 for months, years. And what I told people, hey, listen, do I have some bad people at my jail? Yes, I do. I have some people that are evil. They're evil. I don't know how they got that way. But that is the smallest group of people we have there. And so we have to be able to, A, distinguish that, focus our energies on the people that are fixable. But for those evil ones, the majority of everybody are eventually going to be going back out to the community. You explain to me how it works to put someone in solitary where every study tells you that the harm that's done to them mentally is something that's not going to go away. And that when they do eventually go to the street, this is something that will go with them out to the street. And so for us, it took a lot of time because we had to do this thing right. Because, as I said, I have some really bad people in there. We had one guy who stabbed his public defender. We have one guy there that routinely is trying to stab out my people. They throw things at my folks all the time. So do we need tools? Because my folks don't have any tools, the correctional officers. They don't have guns with them. They don't have, tasers. They don't have that stuff. So, you have to have an ability to do so. So what I believe we have in place is a very thoughtful way where individuals are allowed to come out of their cells for 4 to 5 hours a day, eat the worst of the worst. We keep them at tables where they can't get up from the table. But there's a guy right next to them at the next table and right next to them at the next table. They're in an open room. There's TVs. There's other people in the room. But at the end of the day, trying to work that balance with my staff's safety and also making sure that we're not doing something inherently wrong that years from now people will also sit there and say, my God, you guys did that as well. Two really quick things too then is the other part of this mess, this other part of this mess that is not innocuous by any stretch, is that when people do get released, when they do get released, what do they have left? Well, as one gentleman told me when I was talking to him, he was getting ready to leave my place. And I was just asking him, how did we treat you to see if, it's better or worse, whatever it is. And he said, Tom, this is the best I've ever been treated here. And I was like, okay, you've been here before? Yeah. And it's like, well, sort of good about this one. And he said, I said, okay. I go, but you don't like being here? He goes, no, you guys, this is the best it's ever been, but I want to get home. I got a son I got to get back to. And I said, fantastic. And he says, I'm leaving soon, Mike. I'm pleading out in a couple days, and I will be out of here. I was like, fantastic. And I said to him, I said, what can you tell me? What will you tell me that's going to lead me to believe you're not coming back? And he paused for like about 10, 20 seconds, thought about it, then he looked at me and said, you know, Tom, I'm probably coming back. And I said, no, walk me through that. Why? He said, Tom, you know, I'm going to have a felony conviction now. I'm going back to the community I came from, didn't have a lot of opportunities to start with. He goes, the chances of me getting a job before weren't real great. Now it's going to be even trickier. And he wasn't pulling the violin out. It wasn't like, oh, poor me. But he was just laying it out to me. He says, and I got to earn money. I can always make money dealing dope. And you guys will probably catch me, and I'll be back in here. And I remember thinking to myself, his thought process was actually quite logical. And it's like, okay, well, that's where we have to really focus our energy on. And then when you look at everything, and you look at all the barriers that put people upon release, whether it's having the felony that floats around with them or non-expungible things on their rap sheets, there is almost this notion that we're making it sure that they can't get jobs. And so I always tell people, you don't have to love anybody in the system, but we have to be thoughtful and logical. And in doing that, you'll sit there and come away saying, listen, we got to stop putting the hurdles up that make no sense. They have no connection to what they did. We have to be thinking more thoughtful way. So just in final note here, this is very doable. This is doable, but this is something that there has to be this outrageous sense of urgency. We cannot continue to study this. We cannot keep talking about it. These are real human beings that deserve to be treated much better. Thank you so much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.